Last year, one Sunday, I shared during concerns that I had lost a friend of mine who had been struggling with cancer for over a year. My friend's name was Jody, and he was about 15 years older than I am. At the time he died, he had never been married. He had no children. And I don't know that he had a lot of financial resources left. He did have siblings who were very close to him and supported, and a lot of friends. But when he died, he had asked that his body be donated for scientists to use in cancer research, that there was to be no funeral service. And I think part of the reason for this may have had to do with his lack of funds at the end of his life. And part of it also just had to do with his personality and who he was. But his friends needed a ritual. My friend Jody was an actor, and his friends got together at a community center where he and I used to perform in plays. And they gathered to remember and celebrate his life. They had posters from different plays that he had been a part of, and photographs of plays that he had directed and plays that he had starred in. The place where we had these productions was called the Art Place. It was a community-sponsored arts center where there was theater, there was musical concerts, there were art classes of all different types. It was a wonderful place to be. So in this case, they wanted some sort of a memorial for my friend Jody. So a friend took a flat rock and did a mosaic of sorts that had the comedy drama mask on the front of it, and his name and dates, and also an outline of a mug of coffee. Two things that my friend Jody really loved were theater and coffee. You can see why he and I were so close. There's something about the need to come together collectively for a ritual of some sort that is greater than anything we might feel needing to personally address these momentous times in our lives. And this has always been true. King David realized this, and that's why in our passage today from the beginning of 2 Samuel, he is overseeing a very poetic and dramatic public ritual of mourning. King Saul has died. Saul was the first king of Judah, and he's somebody who is a very strong warlord, somebody that other people followed and trusted to lead them into battle and to protect them. But he was also a very problematic figure. As David comes on the scene, starting as a boy, he begins to feel paranoid about David's popularity and eventually tries to kill him. And Saul ends his life tragically on the battlefield. He is faced with great odds that he and the other troops knew they could not overcome. And he winds up taking his own life in battle. But amazingly, afterwards, the very end of 1 Samuel tells us that there were troops from another nation whom Saul had made an alliance with years ago, who risked their lives to remove Saul's body so that it could receive a proper burial and not be discarded or anything like that by the enemy, which was commonplace in that day and sometimes today. So Saul is one of these figures of great admiration, but also of great tragedy and great loss. And David, who had the reputation for being a songwriter, demands that this song that is called the Song of the Bow, found in the book of Sasser, a book that's referenced like many others in 2 Samuel, but one that's never been dug up by any archaeologist anywhere, is to contain these words. And he sings this lament to someone who was both charismatic and tragic, using this phrase that's become a familiar part of our popular vernacular. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. And he also laments in a very intimate way Saul's son Jonathan, someone who was very close to King David. David writes about him in this psalm. Jonathan lies slain upon your high places. I am distressed for you, my brother. Greatly beloved were you to me. Your love for me was wonderful. Your love for me was passing the love of women. Imagine for a moment what a love looks like that passes the love of a woman for a man, and how it would feel to have that kind of a relationship plucked from you so severely. That's what David is giving voice to in this illustration of both celebration and public mourning. For himself personally, but also for the people. For the people who are influenced and at the mercy of very powerful leaders. For the people who some would be sad because they remember who Saul used to be. And many who would likely be uncertain, not certain what the future is going to behold and what kind of a king and a ruler David is going to be. It's the kind of thing that can't be addressed on its own, but needs to best be looked at with public rituals. Of course, sacred rituals are not always sad. When a couple brings a small child for baptism, they come down before the church and the pastor baptizes that child in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. The couple is saying that they believe it's not just enough to provide food, clothing, and shelter for this child, or even some teachings about ethics. That they want their son, their daughter, to grow up with a sense of who he or she is as a subject in God's kingdom. And whenever a couple gets married and chooses to do that in a sanctuary and in the context of Christian worship, where they're not just professing their love for each other, but for God. When a bride and a groom are saying that as individuals, Christ was the center of their life. So Christ will be the center of their married life and their home life. That's another occasion that's observed through sacred ritual. Birth, marriage, death, these are the kind of milestones that all of us have some connection to in one way or another. But sacred rituals can also be more specific to a certain group of people. Today is the first Sunday of the new appointment year in the Virginia Conference of the United Methodist Church. In different pulpits around Virginia, there are pastors and congregations doing what we all did this time last year, getting to know one another for the first time. And there are special rituals in our book of worship for observing this, for grieving and being thankful for a pastor who leads, but also working faithfully to God with one another in a new day and a new Sunday. And also rituals can be very specific to a given congregation. Today, for instance, as we've recognized and been preparing for, is Mimi's last Sunday. It's our time that we celebrate her wonderful music talents that have dazzled us all and that we will never forget, that are available for others to enjoy thanks to YouTube. And also the spirit that she has and the influence that she's had on us personally. It's a time, one last Sunday, to celebrate who she is and what she's meant to us before properly wishing her well and saying goodbye. Sacred rituals represent a specific moment in our lives. It's a matter of looking at the fact that this particular worship service is unlike any service that has ever been before, and there will never again be another worship service exactly what this one is like. That is what it means to courageously and faithfully observe sacred rituals and worship. It's intimidating and unnerving for a lot of us because it means unplugging either that electronic device that we carry with us or the more challenging work of turning off that busy brain of ours and just being in the moment. It's also intimidating because it turns each of us into theologians. When we approach worship with this spirit, we ask ourselves those questions. Who am I? Why am I here? Who are my neighbors? And what is my relationship to them? It's no wonder that so many of us prefer to be busy rather than contemplate. But the Spirit of God leads us into this time of sacred ritual, this time of worship, to recognize a moment that is unique and will never be again. Thornton Wilder is best known for his play, Our Town, a play in 3 acts. It's a play that's set around the turn of the last century, around the year 1900, in a fictional New England small town. The actors are in costume on the stage, but it's designed for a very minimalist set, sort of a plain table and some chairs. The actors don't have props, but they pantomime, pouring milk into a glass or opening up a newspaper. And throughout the course of this play, there is a stage manager who breaks that fourth wall and addresses the audience and invites the audience to engage in what's going on in the life of the characters portrayed on the stage. 2 of the main characters start out as a young couple, a girl named Emily and a boy named George. George wants to grow up to be a farmer the way his father was and work the land that has been in his family. And early on, Emily and George fall in love with each other. And then in the second act, they get married. And after that, they have children. The stage manager addresses people just at the closing of the second act. And he says in that New England accent, which I won't try to imitate, well, we've seen birth, we've seen life and marriage. Those of you who are paying attention know what's coming next. Emily dies. She dies after giving birth to one of her children. And she is taken to a cemetery out on the edge of town, where we're reintroduced to some of the dead of this community, as the actors sit in chairs with their feet on the floor and their hands in their laps, very still. They represent the dead of this community. And they are talking to Emily about what she's in store for and what it will now be like for her to be a part of the community of the dead. And she's very distraught, and she begs the stage manager, is it possible for me to go back and just experience one day? Just any particular day at all. And the other dead who are there in the cemetery warn her, don't do it. It won't be what you think it's like. You're not going to like it. But she insists, and she decides she will go back to a day in her childhood when she was celebrating her birthday. And the other actors are there on stage reliving this particular scene. And Mama is cooking the breakfast, and her sister is sitting there at the table finishing up her homework because she didn't do it the night before. George leaves a birthday gift for her to find outside of the house. And Emily is looking at all of this, and she's terribly frustrated. She's trying to talk to her family members, but they cannot see her and they cannot hear her. And she's frustrated that they just seem to be going through this everyday morning routine. They are thinking about what's coming next. They're thinking about what it is they're going to do. They're not just in the moment. And finally, completely distraught, she demands to go back, and she goes back to the cemetery where she rejoins the dead. And she speaks out to the stage manager, and she asks him this question: do any human beings ever realize life while they live it? Every minute. The stage manager replies, no. Saints and poets, they do some. Sacred rituals give us the opportunity to recognize the uniqueness of this moment. It gives us an opportunity, guided by the poets and the saints, to realize what is precious and special about this time. A time that has never been before, and a time that will not be again. Sacred rituals are not for the faint of heart. We enter them with fear and trembling, guided by the grace of God. And it doesn't have to be a momentous occasion in the life of a people or a congregation. It can be any Sunday out of the year. It's just a matter of entering into it, recognizing the uniqueness of what it has to offer. If we are courageous enough and faithful enough, when we engage in sacred rituals, when we engage in worship, we feel what it is truly like, and we experience what it truly feels like to be alive. Amen.